song for all that children call their favorite time of year. Snowflakes in the air, carols everywhere, olden times and ancient rhymes of love and dreams to share. Sleigh bells in the air, beauty everywhere, Yuletide by the fireside, and joyful memories there. Christmas time is here, we'll be drawing near. Oh, that we could always see such spirit through the year. Sleigh bells in the air, beauty everywhere, Yuletide by the fireside, and joyful memories there. Christmas time is here, we'll be drawing near. Oh, that we could always see such spirit through the year. Oh, that we could always see such spirit through the year.
Hi, good evening. I'm going to host a little bit of a James Apperson and get him in here a little bit and let him continue his stream. It sounded like he was going to run out of time on his StreamYard, and I wanted to give him an opportunity to sing the praises. So, got to see one of my friends, Mike Connolly and the Beef Manhattans, singing some of their Christmas songs. What a it's a little bit it's from a couple of years ago, almost a decade ago, that he recorded that. Did a Christmas album. Hi, Melody. Hi, Kata. Aw, thank you, Kata. That's so sweet. So that way James can finish his feels. Let me unchoke myself with my scarf. I was out walking the dog. There we go. All right. Oh, really? Is that one still going on? Yeah, I see James right now. Either that or somebody impersonating James.
I'm not used to using restream. Can you hear me okay?
I can. No, it sounds like
Oh,
your
all right.
audio
What
is
about?
afar. Now about that's
All
good. That's
right.
better. Sounded like you were talking into a microphone that was across the room.
Right. So yeah, I'm just looking. So yeah, these the settings are a little bit similar to StreamYard.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Uh,
video, camera, audio.
I I had I had tried a different streaming service which I really liked, but I could not get the audio to work. And about 2 weeks ago, Restream came out with the fix that I was looking for on how to do my audio correct, and fix that. I immediately subscribed, so we can talk on here. I think unlimited or pretty close to it. Certainly not, you know, certainly not till the wee hours of the morning anyway. Maybe for an hour.
Yeah,
We'll see.
that's fine. I don't want to. I don't want to be up too late tonight. Anyways, it's already like 10 o'clock here. So
Yeah, it just turned 9 o'clock here.
very good. So I don't know how much of the conversation from the other stream that you caught, but is there
All
anything?
of it. I caught all of
Oh,
it.
awesome, awesome. I wasn't
You know,
sure.
if I missed anything, it was less than 5 minutes. But I've been highly distracted during that time. But so maybe,
Yeah.
I had another conversation going or something like that with Mrs. Tux.
Hmm.
But I caught
Right.
all of it. I got notified on my phone, and it didn't say minutes ago. It said now.
Awesome.
So,
So
so I caught it from pretty much the beginning.
Did you catch Derek's conversation with Brady tonight?
I No, I did not.
Okay.
Do we wanna pop it up and just kind of
Well, I
cruise
think
through
it
it?
was out. I think it was like 2.5 hours long, and I really wouldn't know where to direct you to. But if you get a chance to check it out,
Yeah,
that's what inspired me to go live tonight. I wasn't gonna I just been too tired lately and just not in the right frame. And Derek
yeah,
inspired me, and then I was talking to Cameron, and then he encouraged me more, and I'm like, yeah, I'll go ahead and do it. Go live, see what happens. But, so we covered a lot of ground, and I know Peter W showed up at some point. And with Peter, I always feel like if I don't say anything, he's getting away with too much, and if I do, I'm picking on him. Like I never feel good about it one way or the other with Peter. Um,
So I'm trying to remember who Peter W is, and I know I've interacted with him, but I am drawing a blank on what that interaction was.
so he's Christian, and I thought he was Catholic, but he recently corrected me. He's Orthodox something or other. I don't even know, but he hangs out with religious fundamentalists, and so he prefers their channels. And so there's a JG spelled GEE. He hangs out there, and I'm capturing Christianity and other channels like that. And because they tell him what he wants to hear, right? They're feeding him this religious fundamentalist propaganda, and he just loves it. And then whenever there's an atheist in the channel, casting aspersions, as it were, then he has a chance to like rail against the enemy, right, and fight the good fight for the Lord. And like he fluctuates though. He fluctuates between kind of being passive and agreeable to being hostile, and it's just like whenever he gets triggered, but then he goes back to being nice again later. I don't know, but he's the only one that consistently shows up in my channel to challenge me, and he
Mm-hmm.
doesn't like what I say, and he doesn't like me, and I can't blame him because he's coming from a particular perceptual paradigm where I'm the enemy. But then I always wonder, like, then why is he here? Like, why is he in my channel if he like hates everything that I say? And I don't know what to think about that. I never directly asked him, but it's fine. I mean, he's welcome there, but he's just going to keep getting upset because I'm going to keep saying things he doesn't want me to say, and it's fine. It's kind of like a Tangelo. He's just addicted to it. He just can't stay away from it. So, but I haven't seen much of Tangelo lately because Tangelo's been writing a book about some kind of crazy thing. So he's been preoccupied. That's why we can safely say Otangelo 3 times. He doesn't show up.
And he hasn't been showing up. Yeah, I discussed that with Mark Reed last week. I was like, usually when I've said Otang's name this many times, he usually pops up.
Yeah.
And
so
I actually sometimes enjoy talking to him, as long as you're not, let him just read his science script, basically.
Right. Otangelo had me on his channel one time. And the video's still up, got my name on it and everything, but it was pointless because all he wanted to do was talk about the detailed stuff about evolution and why he thinks it's wrong. And I kept telling him, this is not my wheelhouse. If you really want to have a legitimate conversation about evolution and the nitty gritty, I'm not the guy for that. If we want to talk about atheism and morality or how it compares to Christianity, we can talk about that. But I know nothing about zinc fingers. Stop it. So that was a big fat waste of time.
Yeah.
But yeah, as soon as he's done writing his book, and I can't remember which conspiracy theory science thing he's trying to rail against in his newest book. Oh, Shroud. I'm almost positive it's Shroud of Turin. He's writing about Shroud of Turin.
Oh yeah. I saw something disturbing the other day of where some sort of deep fake taking the Shroud of Turin and turning it into Jesus talking and reading his own scriptures, which I'm sure I would really want to hear. But it strikes me that this could really be the end of us atheists, or it could perpetuate Christianity falling out of favor, because in my opinion, do you want to hear Jesus cite scriptures, or do you want to hear Jesus tell us about the stories of that time he had to deal with the ruthlessness of Roman Empire and rule, and has spent the last, roughly 1980 years you're exiled in the hellish landscape of absorbing our sins, or how great heaven is. like which one do you think it's going to be? And if you AI Jesus, and all he does is just read, AI poems and, not really do anything, I think it will. It's either one or the other. It's kind of like QAnon was starting to build steam, and then January 6th happened, and everybody was taking a step back and going, hey, you know what? Maybe this QAnon thing is an idea. And I've noticed that short-term memory effect started to infiltrate in, and you're starting to see QAnon kind of build steam again. But
yeah,
it somewhat strikes me.
It's similar to what Otangelo's doing with the Shroud. The more they attach crazy to their religion in public view, right? And the more they get this temporary boost of people who are like, "Hey, I like crazy, give me some more," but in the end, it's going to really hurt them because it's really undermining the integrity of the perceived value of the label of the product. Right? These people are going to more and more associate with republicanism with QAnon, and in Otangelo's corner, they're going to more and more associate, if Otangelo gets his way, right, they're going to more and more associate Christianity with being anti-evolution and pro Shroud of Turin and all this other stuff. So the more they attach crazy to it, the more they're going to hurt themselves in the long run. So with this long view in mind, I kind of love it that Otangelo's writing a book about the Shroud, right? I'm like, the more crazy he can attach to that in the public eye, the more it delegitimizes the label of Christianity itself as an ideological packaged product, and the more it's going to hurt their marketing in the long run. So, if Otangelo wants any help writing that Shroud of Turin book, I'm here for you, buddy. I'm here. Let's do this.
Yeah. Chris Moore just posted that either way he's allergic to worshiping dead man. I think that's hilarious.
Right.
So,
So I mean, it's catch-22. If you worship a guy that's still alive, then you're completely vulnerable to whatever he decides on a whim to say tomorrow.
yeah.
But if you worship a guy that's dead, instead you've transferred that vulnerability to whoever claims to speak in his name, whoever you give that credence to, right? So now whatever they're going to say tomorrow, you're vulnerable to it.
Yeah.
And it's just like, you're just trading one fallible source for another, really. So, I mean, more power to them, and it doesn't bother me except for the way that it affects the world that I live in. And we talked about this in my stream too. I don't care, right? Just don't hurt anybody. But the problem is they don't know when they're hurting people, right? They can't make that differentiation in a reliable way. Jay came on the stream today in my channel and talked about that. His mom doesn't understand how she's being unfair to him. She doesn't, neither do his grandparents. They don't get that they have certain social responsibilities that they want to maintain that relationship with Jay. And they're the ones forsaking those responsibilities. They're the ones that aren't growing into that capacity, that role. And, Jay doesn't want to have to leave him behind. Right. But, a lot of us are going through that right now. Kat is going through that. Melody's been going through that with her people, with some success on Melody's part. It's actually gone a bit better than I think Melody was expecting it to go. But a lot of us are going through that. And there's always going to be people in our community that are, where they're trying to figure out how they can be seen and respected for who they are with their religious family members. And that just wouldn't be the case. It wouldn't be a problem if their religion was all about love and acceptance and tolerance and family, right? You wouldn't even need to have that discussion with them. But we do. And it's a hurdle. It's in the way because their religion is in the way of healthy human relationships.
Mm-hmm. What do you think? One of the problems I did see with Jay's confession / testimonial is there's an all or nothing here. It seems like I can't put myself exactly in Jay's shoes in this, but there's always a distaste for me anyway to see this, especially with a parent, as combating it with the divorcement. It seems like you still have to have the marriage mentality, and you'll catch flies with honey far better.
Sure.
And I wonder how can we help Jay? Is that a way I can help Jay? To say, hey, just relax a little bit. Time will heal all wounds. Making a rash decision that causes the gash to widen isn't maybe the best. Because I don't know what the right answer is, but from my outside perspective, not having any skin in this game, how do I? Is that the right thing to do? And Jay, the thing's pinned if you're around, if you want to hop on. But what is your?
Yeah. So I didn't get a chance to hear the conversation, and I almost wish they'd had it on stream so I could give him better feedback, because I don't know what was said or how it was said or anything else. Not that anybody wants to have their private family business on a live stream at such a pivotal moment in their journey, but without that, man, it's really hard to tell, just to say anything about a conversation I know almost nothing about.
Yeah.
I did give Jay some thoughts going into this, like weeks and months ago, about probably how I would handle it. And we've talked about this before on the channel. If you make it about maybe he did this, I have no idea. But if you make it about yourself, just instead of saying your religion's wrong, I figured it out, you need to get caught up to speed, maybe you could say something like, I'm no longer a person who thinks that way or feels that way about all of it. And the journey has been kind of messy and kind of predicted, and I'm just trying to make sense of life the best I can. I'm just not in that headspace anymore. And here's me letting you know that I still want to be seen, I want to be heard, I want to be valued, I want to be appreciated and loved and respected. But I don't want it on charity. I want you to actually have this investment in me moving forward. And I have this concern that prior investments were based on the idea of a narrative, that maybe I've just been a character in a story, and that my value to some of the people in our family has been that of a character in a story. And that because of that, because I'm no longer identifying as that character, and because I no longer identify or embrace that story, I worry that that as I move away from that and I need to be honest with people about where I'm at in my journey and who I am. I worry that people will lose sight of who I am, or maybe they never even saw who I was in the first place because I'm not that character in that story. I don't think I really ever
Mhm.
was. I just supposed that I was, and I humored it, and accepted it for the longest time. But now I don't anymore. And just kind of let somebody know, like, look, I don't know how much you want to know about my journey, where I'm exactly at, how I arrived at where I'm at. Um, but I want to let you know that because I want to continue to make an investment in you, and because I want to encourage you to continue to make those kinds of investments in me, I want you to know that that trust is still there. I'm extending it in hope, right? I'm willing to trust you with insights into my journey, where I'm at right now. And I'm offering you an invitation to not necessarily embrace my narrative instead of your own, but to read my narrative, to examine where I'm at in my journey, to learn more about where I'm at, how I got here, so that you can understand me in the context of who I really am and where I'm really at. And if you don't want to, that's a decision you're going to have to make. But if you want to continue to invest and evolve and nurture and grow and mutually benefit from what we could have together, as for example, mother and son, then I'm here for that, and I will be tomorrow, and I will be next year. This is not like a coupon; it doesn't expire, right? This is just where I'm at, and I hope that you'll consider making that investment to understand better where I'm at. Not not in the frame of I'd like to prove your religion wrong, but in the frame
Mhm.
of this is where I'm at. This is about me where I'm at. It's not about me trying to get you to be somewhere else. I want to be seen. I want to be heard. I want to be understood in context, so that when you say you love me, it means something deeper and something truer than you love a character in a story, right? And or you love my potential to be that. Like, I need you to see me. And then at that point they can just respond how they want to. And if they're like, okay, yeah, I want to know about where you're at and how you've gotten there, then you can start to share. And you can say, we're not going to be able to cover all this in one sitting. It's just too much. But I'm just going to kind of give you the gist of it. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask me the questions. And if it gets to be too much, we'll just stop, and we can continue it when you've had a chance to digest what I'm giving you, and we can go from there, days, weeks, or months forward. That way, it's not threatening to them. It's not accusatory. It's not threatening. It's not insulting. You're not telling them that they're wrong or that they're invalid. You're simply saying, "Here's where I'm at, and I'm worried that we're going to go apart from this, um, and I want to see if we can avoid that." Right? and and give them an opportunity to decide how much they want to invest and how much respect they want to extend to you and understanding. And they'll just they'll let you know. You don't even have to guess. You don't have to beg. You don't have to plead. You don't have to argue. They'll let you know how far, what it's worth to them, what it's worth to them to develop your relationship and meet you on an understanding, right? And they either will or they won't. And if they do, they just do however much they do. As long as you make it gentle and patient for them, I think anybody that truly is invested in the idea of a connection with you as family, they'll make the time. They'll go through the process. They just might have to do it in pieces, right? And time to digest. And it might be bumpy roads. They might sometimes hit a sour note with you, right? You might sometimes end on a sour note or have this moment of discord, but you can recover from it. That's just part of the human experience. Just ride it out. And that was my advice. And I don't know if that's what he took to that stage or if it's not. Um, Melody says James is voicing some of what I am, what I'm dealing with. Yes. So, what are your thoughts on that, Tux?
Well, I think you're clearly more familiar with the scenario and have discussed it with Jay a lot more. Um, I just think I just know that life always turns out better when you treat it when you treat everything as going into it as a marriage instead of a divorce. And it kind of sounded to me when Jay was on your stream earlier that he was ready to go divorce. Um, mentally separating. Um, I don't know. That's what it sounded like to me. That
So, I mean, yeah, I get that vibe, and I picked up on that vibe too. But like you said, like there's a limit to what we can know. This is Jay's headspace, and that's why we were both kind of hoping he was in chat right now to kind of jump in and share some more of that with us. But um, I think that Jay's just in a really raw place right now. Like it hurts,
mm-hmm,
right? He's been wrestling with this because it matters, and there's some fear there and some disconnect. And COVID really has been hard on Jay because he's high risk and because he takes it very serious. And this is separate from the issue of some people think it should be taken less seriously, and some people agree with how serious he takes it. Like separate from the issue, he takes it how serious he takes it, and he's got reasons that I think are rational for how serious he takes it. Been very isolated, and that's one of the reasons why. In fact, that's maybe the primary reason why this community has been so important for Jay and for a lot of other people here. I mean, Kata lives on the side of a mountain in the deep outback of Australia, right? And so many of us, for different reasons and different circumstances, feel quite isolated these days. And Jay's losing his sense of connection gradually with the people that he loves, and his family. And he doesn't feel properly seen, heard, respected, invested in, or anything else, and it's all understandable. He's coming from a place that's very raw and very vulnerable and very fearful and very upset, and understandably so, understandably upset. And so I think that some of the divorce vibe that we're getting is from a place of a transitional place where he's still trying to work it out. And I don't know this for sure, but this is my interpretation of it, that he's just trying to work through these issues out loud with the community support. Um, it's just where he's at in the moment, how he's feeling. And I think part of the reason it's so raw for him right now is it was just today that he had the conversation with his mom, a conversation that has been a long time in coming.
mm-hmm,
And I think that if we were weeks or months or even a year past it, he might not have as much of a divorce vibe as he did today. But
mm-hmm,
it's kind of a polemic that, I mean, he already wrestles with bipolar disorder, and he's been very vocal about this, very open about this, transparent. So, I think that maybe makes a person more inclined towards black and white when their emotions are strong, right? Like we got to get this resolved now, like kind of a thing, like you're in or you're out kind of a thing. And that's just coming from a place of pain and angst, right? Like I don't know. Even Jay doesn't know, I'm sure, how he's going to feel or think or process it tomorrow or next week or next month. But yeah, I mean, I would advise caution if he were here, and I kind of did earlier, and I would again if it comes up again.
mm-hmm.
Um, but it's difficult. It's a difficult thing to work through, and this is the reason. It's so much uncertainty and so much to lose, and so a lot of the people in our community, like Melody Joy, like for the longest time, just was just waiting to work up the courage and a feeling of kind of having some sort of a game plan, right, to go into this. And Kat is working on that right now, and some other people in our community are too. I've gone through this years ago. Like I have the benefit of there's nobody left to come out to,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so is that good or bad? I don't know. The only people in my life are my two kids that live here with me. That's it. There's the only two people that I have in the entire world physically that are here in the country with me. I have a good friend in Canada. I have another in Israel. Other than that, everybody that I know and talk to is online. Everybody is in this community. It's all I've got in the world. Um, so I don't know. Like I can't speak too much to what it's like for somebody else when they're coming from a different place. But like, and you said the same, right? Like you can't completely relate to where Jay's at because it's not identical to a situation that you've been in,
Mm-hmm.
and that makes perfect sense to me. And I don't know, like I'm rooting for Jay, and that's probably all I could say about it. I'm rooting for him. I feel him. I get where he's saying. I agree that probably he needs to work on having a for his own sake. If like he really wants a positive outcome, I don't know. Like he doesn't want to leave it unresolved, right? Because he's in this anxious state that doesn't get resolved because the situation isn't resolved. I mean, he doesn't want to take years to work through something that should have never been an issue and should be simple enough, right? And I get him, like, yeah, logically, but someone's coming from that religious framework, like logic isn't going to be a strong point for them. It's just not being fair and being understanding. Eh, eh. So, they can only give what they can give. They're at where they're at too. Just like we're at our own unique place in our journey, so are they. So all we can do is let people meet us on their terms, let them know where we stand and what we want, and see if they'll make the investment with us or if they won't. It's all we can do. So all I can say is I wish him well about it. But it's frustrating when somebody like Peter W comes into the chat and starts talking about how Christianity's this altruistic force of good in the world, and that we're shortchanging it when we see faults in it that aren't there. And I'm like, come on, we're not making this stuff up, right? What are your thoughts?
If Jay needs help, I'd certainly do my best to help him. Um, and I'll just leave it at that. If you need help, let me know. I'll try to be there for you as well. Just build this community. Be sincere. Be yourself.
Yeah.
Um, you know, we got a long ways to go. Um, I would like to ask what the best part of the Brady interview with Derek. Is there a most memorable moment that
Hmm.
you can think of?
I appreciated that he likened his recovery from religion to his recovery from heroin. That he made a direct correlation there of both being forms of addiction,
Mm-hmm.
and that it worked out best for his journey to kick both addictions at once. And I'm sure that cannot have been easy. I can't even kick my addiction to comfort food, right? And here this guy's kicking two deeply held addictions. One, heroin, which is just world renowned for being a difficult thing to kick. And then and he wasn't just in a little bit deep to the heroin rabbit hole. He was in very deep. And
Hmm.
then also his equally deep investment into the to religious fundamentalism. To have kicked both at once, I don't know how he did it. Like he's got a channel about it. He has a separate channel that he runs for that. And I really need to spend more time over there because honestly, food addiction is very much like a drug addiction. The only reason we get addicted to comfort foods is because they release or they trigger the release of feel good neurotransmitters in the brain, the exact same as heroin does. I mean, in principle, the exact same, not chemically the exact same, but it's very similar. And so, I really should be spending more time at his channel because man, I'm struggling with that so hard. And people think it's just not that serious of an issue, but it is when you reach a certain weight and depression because of it, then it becomes a real big issue. So I need to spend more time over there. That was probably the point that stuck out for me the most. I did clip a couple of moments from the video, but
Mm-hmm.
honestly, most of that was for Jay. Like Jay, at one point, Derek addressed the issue that Jay addressed today, where he's talking about how if these people spend all these years where they're entitled and still feel entitled, to preach at you some Jesus, but you don't have a right to contradict them or speak contrary perspective. And now they don't want to have a conversation. Now there's no reason to discuss anything about it. And it's not fair, right? And I don't remember exactly how he worded it, but I'll have to go review the clip later. Beyond that, he talked a lot about the show itself and the journey, and how his deconversion from fundamentalism left him with this new understanding and this new appreciation for academia, for historical research, and for logical reasoning, and for ethical, pro-social behaviors, and for family and connections. But along the way, he wanted to clarify for the audience that he's not anti-theism. He's not anti-spirituality. He's not anti-whatever. He's just, if he takes a position about any of those things, it is specific to fundamentalism. He's seen the way that fundamentalism wrecks families and wrecks people's abilities to reason, and in a sober and accountable way, and their ability to like explore the larger world and the larger context, and all the harm that can do. And so, and I am paraphrasing here, but I think it's a fair paraphrase. And so he wants people to understand that he doesn't have a mission to make people become atheists. He doesn't have a mission to make people want to like forsake all their beliefs and stuff. His wife, he cited as an example, believes that there is something. She's not calling it a god, but there is something, she thinks. And he respects that. Like, that's where she's at in her journey. But if she were fundamentalist about it, like Christian fundamentalist or Islamic fundamentalist, he would have a problem. He would not. I don't know what he'd do. He didn't say what he would do, but that'd be a whole other thing for him. And of course it is. And so while he does admit to confessing bias and on his own channel, he admits this. But it's only about fundamentalism, right? It's not about religiosity in general. It's not about theism. It's not about any of that stuff. It's not even about Christianity. It's just about the fundamentalism. Beyond that, he just wants to promote healthy discussion, equitable dialogue, good logical processes, diligent research. And so when his guests come into Myth Vision with their own, like he has Ehrman on one time to talk about how we know there was a historical Jesus. And then the next thing you know, he's got Carrier on to talk about how there almost certainly wasn't, or not certainly, but the preponderance of the evidence says that there wasn't even a historical Jesus. And it's not like Derek is changing his mind and then selecting a new guest every week as his mind changes. Derek used to be mythicist, and now he leans historicist, but that's not the point. That's not the point for the channel. He just has specialists on that are well versed in these issues to share their insights, their research, their conclusions, their reasonings, and let the audience decide for themselves what stands to reason. Go do your own research, buy these books, read these sources, consider these issues, make up your own mind, right? And that was a big. Go ahead.
Well, one thing I'm a little confused, and I would love to have a conversation with Derek about this, is, where is the line in which, and I really don't understand the definitions or the colloquial terms that are being used maybe, but when you say mythicist and you say historicist, what does it really matter if there was a Joshua apocalyptic preacher, whatever last name he went by, whether he was a bastard, whether he was Joseph's kid, doesn't matter. He probably didn't have the Holy Spirit impregnate Mary. It's a story just like Caesar Augustus' birth narrative. And the kid Joshua was born just like everybody else, just like you and I were born. So where does the exaggerated story, where does the legendary development, where does that define whether it's myth or not versus somebody actually existed who took on the character named Jesus Christ?
Right.
And I don't understand why it's taboo to say mythicist if you are in the camp that Yeah, there was probably a real guy that existed, but all of this, you know, fluff
Hmm.
to create that somebody created the narrative with didn't really happen. The things that
Hmm.
Jesus said and did didn't come from Jesus. My guess is they came from other apocalyptic preachers who had practiced their trope, and they. Apologia just had a video, not the one they dropped this morning, but about 3 days ago, where
Hmm.
he's basically going through that these comedians uh, practice they practice their shtick, and once they get it right, then they go prime time with it, and saying that there are apocalyptic preachers somewhere between the Maccabean Hellenistic Mithras uh, into Christianity. You clearly see kind of an evolution going on in the works that kind of precurse the Christian narrative.
Hmm.
So I wonder what your take is. What is the difference between saying I'm a historicist or a mythicist?
Oh, I'm very glad you're asking me about this. I have actually tried to have a more nuanced discussion about this several times on the Myth Vision Facebook page. And every time that I've tried to, man, it's been like pulling teeth. It doesn't matter who I'm pulling it from. People just don't want to have that more nuanced conversation. And I agree with you 100% that we're speaking as if there is some clearly defined line between these two ways of thinking when there isn't, and we're speaking as if it frickin' matters when it doesn't. And these blow my mind as well. And I understand why the scholars are invested in the way that they are. Carrier has made, for example, his career on if only a few issues, and this being probably certainly his most notable issue that he's done research on and published on and spoke on. And every time somebody refutes his work and tries to delegitimize it, he feels personally attacked and like people are going after the integrity and the value of his career, and by extension him as an academic and as a person. Takes it very, very personal. And this actually played a huge role, not the only dysfunction, but a problem of many that kind of created this perfect shitstorm between him and the people he's in this bitter rivalry with still. I mean, it was going on last month, and I thought it should have already died out. Apparently, it's still going on, where these people, and you probably know who the players are. Yeah, I don't know if you followed it or not, but
Yeah,
him,
Neil, and
godless
I can't.
engineer,
Yeah, Godless Engineer. I just
yeah,
saw the video. I didn't realize they were going at it. I've never been a huge fan of Godless Engineer.
no, I mean neither.
He's just never. His work has never struck me. As great. It's
Right?
never hooked me anyway.
Yeah,
Um, and Neil's work has always been, I thought, very intriguing. The History Valley always had some great content, but
sure.
you know, he's not one of my favorite. Um, I, I'll put it this way: the best channel I think for this argument is a channel called Fishers of Evidence, and I don't even know the guy's name, but he is the best at taking an objective look at the difference between the two. Who's kind of
Hmm.
got the upper hand on each individual argument surrounding the historicity and the mythicist point of view, and does a great job representing both. So,
Yeah,
um, and it's almost like in my opinion, the Reuters news of reporting it.
right. So I just now pulled it up and grabbing the link real quick. Am I in the channel? Yeah, I'm in the channel. I'm in the front of the channel. I'll paste it real quick. Anybody here wants to go ahead and grab that, they can. So, did you want to extrapolate on that more, or do you want to?
You mean play this link? You mean?
It's up to you. Like, if you weren't done, I don't want to interrupt you.
I was gonna try to play something with from Brady's channel today,
Okay.
but let's this has gone into a different direction. Let's save that for another day.
Sure.
And let me try to get this link. I have to go into the stream and do it this way, I think. Oh, I can hear myself. Oh, I had already made you. All right, let me do a little screen sharing, and voila.
Examine the question of whether or not Jesus Christ was an actual historical figure. The matter is complicated by strong and diverse preconceived ideas, by limited ambiguous historical data, and by the coincidence of two completely different debates. One is about purely secular interpretation of historical evidence, and the other is about whether God exists or not. Theories about Jesus can broadly be grouped into three types: triumphal historicity, reductive historicity, and myth. This is Raphael's 1520 painting of the Transfiguration to illustrate triumphal historicity, a theory which holds not only that Jesus was a real man who lived on earth, but also that the Gospels are a substantially accurate record of his life and works. Here, on the other hand, is a 2002 painting by forensic artist Richard Neve of what Jesus may have looked like had he been a man, to illustrate reductive historicity, the theory that Jesus was a man, but that he had no supernatural powers. Discriminating between these two theories is really about examining theology, as the substantial difference between them is the supernatural component of Jesus' existence. While this...
So, so have you ever seen this video before, James?
No, I've never seen this video. I've seen these images before, but I've never watched this video before.
Yeah. Ken Humphreys, yeah, he's not quite as brash. There's no brashness like Ken Humphreys has. You know who Ken Humphreys is, James?
No, I'm not familiar with Ken.
He's got a channel called JesusNeverExisted.com.
Oh.
And I tell you what, if you ever want to watch a good debate, Ken Humphreys debates Gary Habermas about 15-ish years ago. And you can tell it's not very often that Gary Habermas is clearly frustrated with the respect my authority, and Kent Humphreys is definitely in the category of I don't care about your authority. Jesus never existed, and he just keeps piling on and keep piling on. Now, I'm not 100% positive that Ken Humphreys is right, but he is a junkyard dog. He's a junkyard dog compared to this guy.
Wow.
I don't even know the name of this guy, in all honesty. But he's down to earth, and he really takes the approach, I believe, of there were people 2,000 years ago just trying to make their way through the world, and this is a view into the window of how they decided to do it.
Mm-hmm.
I think ultimately, if you just boil down his probably 150 hours of work, I think that's what it comes down to. Is he's concluded in one way or another, people were hungry and they needed roofs over their heads, and this is the way they figured out how to do it. So that's my story. I'm sticking to it. And BS, I just want to I want to show this. Thought Tux's channel was a myth for the longest time. Now I've repented. Bless you, my son. And and BS, I also want to report to you. Remember, don't make videos as long as the one you're about to release ever again. I want you to remember that. Can you remember that? Can you remember that for me?
We're still looking forward to it, but yeah, no. Fair. As someone
Uh,
who's got a reputation for making 7-hour streams, I can't say too much about it, but yeah.
uh, BS. This is Fissures of Evidence, and I think they sound completely different because, um, like my favorite. Yeah, let me try to find my favorite one is from the Ken Humphreys is the Spice Girls. He does Spice Girls, and it's pretty funny. Spice Girl.
Who was your favorite Spice Girl, Tux?
Uh, I don't remember what they called her. Jerry Holly. I don't remember
Oh,
their
the red
names.
hair. The red hair.
Yeah,
Which one was she? She's not posh. She's not sporty. She's not baby.
yeah, I don't
Ginger?
know.
Was it
Ginger.
Ginger?
Yeah, I think that's
Ginger
it.
Spice.
Yeah, that's a very interesting question.
Yeah. So I liked elements of each. Like each had something about them that I loved more than the
Yeah,
others. So like if my favorite Spice Girl would be like just get to combine all my favorite elements into one.
yeah, I guess.
Like I
Uh,
liked Baby's playfulness, free spiritedness, but I loved Pasha's face. Like I thought she was the prettiest. Um, uh, Ginger had a certain way about her, a certain feminine charisma. If you what's the word for feminine charisma? I have no idea. But I
yeah,
loved the way that she moved and the way that she expressed herself, and she had a great energy. I loved it. So I can't blame you at all for picking her as a favorite. And
yeah.
Sporty was the most athletic.
Uh,
So
m- Melanie C has probably my favorite non-Spice Girl song with "I Turn to You." I think it's called. I turn to you. I guess I don't remember.
yeah,
It's a club song.
yeah.
It's a club song, and I love it. Uh,
That
well,
"Tell Me What You Want" song was my favorite one. It always will be. So
that there's a club mix of that one that I enjoy as well. So
nice. So yeah, really quick on the historical versus um, mythical. It, one of the points I've made in those discussions is if you think about it, um, your favorite DC or Marvel comic heroes weren't created cold cloth. They were based on real people that somebody knew. So, for example, Wonder Woman is a composite character made from elements of because the guy that created the Wonder Woman character was in a polyamorous relationship with two women, and he took elements of them to create Wonder Woman from. And so if we correlate that to the mythical versus historical debate, it is equivalent to asking whether or not Wonder Woman really existed, and having someone like Bart Ehrman say absolutely she existed because there was a woman who said some of these things or did some of these things. It's a ridiculous position or way to frame the narrative, in my opinion, to say, yeah, we know Wonder Woman existed because the character is based on somebody real, at least
mhm.
loosely. And it's the same with like Vlad the Impaler didn't exist, right? But or Vlad the Impaler did exist, but Dracula didn't exist, right? So if somebody asked you, did Dracula exist? It'd be kind of like Bart Ehrman saying, yeah, because Vlad the Impaler existed, therefore Dracula existed. I'm like, come on. We need a more nuanced way to use language in order to kind of make the necessary and important distinctions that we're trying to make here. At the end of the day, like you said, it doesn't matter, except that some people have built their career on taking a position,
Mhm.
and then so now it matters for them. Why it matters to people in the general community, I have no freaking idea. I know why it matters to Christians because they need for there to have been a guy in order to build upon the idea, like a bridge that they build this other figure on. But anybody else, it's always amazed me that people like get so deeply invested in the debate about whether or not it was based on a real guy or not. Of course, it was one way or the other. It was because every character, even Santa Claus, um, Saint Nicholas of Bari, or whatever his more full name was, he was the base character for Santa Claus, right?
Mhm.
So every character is always drawing from something that the writer knows or has heard about from somebody who knows. It always traces back to real people, always in some way or another. So the distinction here is really not meaningful at all, as I see it. It's meaningful for somebody who built a career on it. It's meaningful for somebody that built a religion on it. It shouldn't be meaningful for anybody else. So that's where I stand about it. And the only reason I even care about all the drama that's happening between the different channels right now is because I think it's hurting the community.
Hmm.
And
Well, when I watch that, I actually somewhat think that it's manufactured. That the drama is being manufactured.
oh, maybe.
In honesty, if I had to be honest, and you said, Jimmy, what's going on here? What's your observation? And I'd say, I think somebody picked a fight. Somebody responded to the picked fight, and now we got ourselves calculated drama.
Maybe. It does seem awfully over the top for intelligent grown men to be so dramatic. It just, I mean, I hope you're right. I do. I hope that that's all it is.
Like, I think that you have everything to gain from creating a controversy which creates bad publicity, which is actually good publicity. It's kind of the CNN motif when Trump is running for president. Hey, let's cover the news. Not only that, but we're going to get somebody in here that stirs the shit and creates the news. And then we ourselves as CNN, people are going to watch because not only are we covering the news, but we're creating the news, which then we have to cover creating the news, which we just so happen to generate the news ourselves, so we're covering ourselves. What's bad is good, and good is good. So I honestly think that that's kind of what's going on. So let me use an example to what you were saying to address it directly. I don't know Adrian Cronauer from Adam, but I know the version that Robin Williams played in Good Morning Vietnam.
Mm-hmm.
So, which one is real? This fictitious character version of Adrian Cronauer, or there's people that have good memories of Adrian Cronauer, and that person really exists? Because the one that we saw in the movie, that was just Hollywood using basically the foundation of a name and creating entertainment from it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if that's what Jesus is, then you have a scenario, and I think Dennis R. MacDonald is the first person I heard state this, is that whatever the first gospel was, because I think, if I remember correctly, he's on the fence whether it was Mark. He thinks it was Mark, but it could be Matthew. But either way, there was probably a much shorter version of Matthew originally, and it may not have been in the Greek that everything else was written in, or some variation of that. Either way, there's a moment. There's a moment that Dennis R. MacDonald is under the impression that this was the foundation for his belief that it's replicating Homer's Odyssey and Iliad, is that this was a modernized contemporary version originally of those works brought to a modern contemporary version circa BC to AD transition.
Yeah, I can see that being plausible.
And if you have an Adrian Cronauer example of, you have a real person, the information is based off of and is brought to life by a actor in this fictional form, what's the difference? The problem is now everybody thinks it's some sort of demigod, deity,
Mm-hmm.
and you better do what this deity's book says, or else you're gonna burn in hell and have psychological effects
Right.
for the rest of your
Right.
life. You
Right.
know. So
Yeah, I can see that happening again and again throughout the ages, in different forms. Now, Dr. Josh's wife has a channel where they regularly get together to review, um, not Homer's Iliad so much as remakes of the idea of the narrative in different forms that's taken, and then and just explore those for just the literary wonder of seeing what other people have done with the story. And they don't mean it as a parallel to how Bibles could have developed, but it does show how it could have. And they've talked about that a lot in Myth Vision too, about how there really well could be a natural progression of taking old ideas and old stories and kind of reinventing them with what would then be modern setting, right? And then people would be receptive to it because they would recognize elements that they were already familiar with. So they've already been psychologically primed to, accept those kinds of narrative stories. Like it's familiar to them.
mm-hmm.
So, I mean, all of that makes sense. I just hadn't really thought about it for that before, but it's plausible.
Yeah. I'm going to speed up our friends here at Fishers of Evidence.
Okay.
And we'll go back to him.
This is certainly a worthy area of study. It is not our present purpose in this series. This ancient statue of Egyptian gods Isis and Horus illustrates the myth theory, which holds that originally Jesus was seen as a spiritual entity only and not as a man. He did have a limited biography in the spirit realm and was seen as a personal saviour. This spiritual being was then given a fictitious historical biography, which became the Gospel of Mark. Other Gospels then were derived from Mark and took the story in various different directions. In short, the myth theory holds that the Gospel account of Jesus is entirely mythical. The actual origin of the myths need not concern us greatly, but as you probably know, the Egyptian god Horus has been advanced as one of the potential prototypes from which Jesus was developed.
Yeah, I've said that a couple of times. There's a pretty striking origin story to Horus, Iris, and the Jesus demigod figure.
It is this distinction between minimal historicity and myth theories that we'll be examining. To do that, we need to define minimal historicity because there have been several competing definitions. One thing that is certain to be true is that there was a person called Jesus living in Judea in the first half of the 1st century AD. In fact, there would have been many because it was a common name. But our Jesus has to be more than that. One definition used for minimal historicity is that Jesus was the founder of a religion and was crucified. Another is that he was the founder of a religion, was a preacher, was called Jesus, and was crucified. The definition that we will use is that for our Jesus to have existed, he did not need to be called Jesus in his lifetime, and he didn't need to have been crucified, but he did need to have founded a religion, to have been the first leader of that religion, and for that religion to have continued after his death, and for its followers to have come to regard him as a god and worshipped him. Furthermore, that religion must have gone on to become what we now call Christianity, or at least was one of several religions which coalesced to form what we now call Christianity. In short, the minimal historicity theory holds that the gospel account of Jesus are largely mythical, but underlying them was a real Jesus of some sort. The method we will use is to construct a historical timeline, and to place the two theories on it, and from them derive what we would expect to find in the historical record under each one. Where those theories predict the same evidence in the historical record, we will disregard it, and we will only focus on those areas where the two theories predict different evidence.
So, I'm going to fast forward a little bit to, let's see.
But it's not practical to avoid argument from authority altogether. The alternative to argument from authority is argument from the evidence, and that can be highly complex. The most familiar argument from authority at the moment concerns climate change. The evidence here is highly complex and is dependent on very elaborate computerized climate models that non-professionals have no hope of recreating, and for that reason there's not much option for most of us but to rely on what the experts say to guide us. If, however, we really want to know, we have to go down to the level of the evidence. In the question of the historicity of Jesus, numerous experts contribute to the field, including linguists, ancient historians, theologians, archaeologists, and so on, and it's clearly impractical to disregard arguments that involve citing their authority. But we will specifically reject arguments from authority in those situations where the two competing theories have different predictions about what evidence should be sought. Minimalist historicity is the current mainstream consensus in secular biblical scholarship, whereas mythicism has few adherents and many of those who do promote it have limited scholastic credentials. This means that arguments from authority strongly favour the historicist point of view, and therefore discounting arguments from authority gives a significant boost to the mythicists. In fairness, though, we will also reject one of the mythicists' favourite arguments. That is a version of a straw man argument, and it is to show evidence that argues against a triumphalist Jesus and imply that it argues against a minimalist Jesus when it does not.
So, what do you think so far there?
I think that he's laying it out very well.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll begin by constructing a timeline of facts and dates that both the myth and historic schools can agree on. The dates here are not intended to be exact, but I have divided the last 2 millennia into 3 periods. A formative period, during which Christian beliefs were developed into what is substantially their current form, followed by a period of historicist hegemony. We can't be certain about when this period began, but an early marker is Emperor Constantine's Edict of Milan, which decriminalised Christian worship in 313 AD, and the First Council of Nicaea in 325, which was a significant milestone in the process of doctrinal conformity within the Church. Christianity became the established church of the Roman Empire, and the form of Christianity that took the reins was historicist, and their hegemony was characterised by vigorous and brutal suppression of heresy, such that any writing that contradicted the historicist standpoint of the church was neglected and lost through decay, or actively suppressed. Furthermore, we might expect that records were falsified, added to, or edited in order to support the church's historicist position. Information coming down to us in the modern age therefore comes in 2 forms. Firstly, there are those sources that have passed through the period of hegemony and been tidied up and edited for historicity. And secondly, there will be occasional sources that have avoided such censure, either because documents were hidden throughout this period, or any records that may have survived in geographical locations outside the reach of the Christian Church. I'll refer to this second form as side-channel information.
Yeah.
The period of hegemony, largely the Middle Ages, was then followed by the modern period during which the Church gradually lost its grip on the interpretation of records, and side-channel evidence began coming to light. Both the myth and historic theories make the same predictions about what we would find during the period of hegemony, because whichever theory was true, the historicist theory was the accepted one and the one that guided what evidence was left. This means that the formative period of Christianity is the main focus for seeking evidence to decide between the 2 theories. Here I have expanded the formative period and divided it into 2 parts. There is an early eyewitness period. This is the period during which eyewitnesses to a historical Jesus are likely to have been available. The exact dates of Jesus' life are debated, but according to the Gospels he would have been born in 6 BC or 4 AD, and would have died in 30 or 33 AD. Life expectancy in the ancient world wasn't that long, but there would still have been some people around in their 60s and maybe even 70s, and this would put the latest date for a living eyewitness to be towards the end of the 1st century. The Judeo-Roman War of 66 to 70 AD ended with the sacking of Jerusalem and the destruction of the Jerusalem temple by the Romans in the year 70. This event was followed by the inhabitants of Jerusalem being scattered.
I'm having different thoughts about this. One, there's this. I've noticed that the same Christians that want to argue that it's possible that the original eyewitnesses were around when they were like 70 years old are the same Christians that argue that the original people were all killed long before then as martyrs for the faith.
Yeah.
And I'm like, you can't have it both ways. And we can have some random onlooker, like somebody in a crowd that maybe saw something and they're still alive. But since you're saying that the apostles wrote the Gospels, and at the same time the apostles died, according to you, like when right around the time that Jesus, like soon after Jesus died, I'm like, well, then who's going to be around 70 years later to write about this if they died as martyrs already? It has to either be a non-eyewitness or somebody that at the very best just wasn't an apostle, just an onlooker that saw some shit. You can't have it both ways. You can't have the original apostles still around at 70 years old to write the Gospels themselves if they already died as martyrs. So I don't want to point that out, but there's a lot of interesting things he's pointing out here. In order for us to suppose that a God orchestrated all this stuff and it all actually happened, and that he then wanted to make sure that these stories got preserved, we don't just stop at making the initial assumptions. We continue to make grander and grander assumptions about the lineage of transmission for the stories, because that same God would have to make sure that every time somebody wanted to add something false to the canon, it somehow magically got rejected. And every time somebody wanted to change something, that just didn't happen either. Maybe the ink wouldn't land on the paper. And then every time the church had a controversy that they decided to settle with heated arguments or votes, right, that it always went exactly the right way, right? So there's this increasingly complex web of micromanagement that the creator of the universe would have to do in order to make sure that the record didn't get so corrupted over centuries and centuries. And if you listen to the description this guy's given us about the cultural soup that all this stuff is swimming in for all those centuries, it would be an incredible, like, God wouldn't even be able to sleep. He'd have to be diligent 24/7 with angel help to make sure that nobody snuck in the middle of the night to change anything or to burn anything or whatever to suit their religious and political agendas. right? Because we know how people are. We know that's the way psychology works for human beings, especially when they get overly invested in these religious ideas. Everybody's sure that they're right, everybody else is wrong, and they're going to do whatever it takes to vindicate their view. So if they've got even access to any documents which need to be preserved, or any influence for who's going to be telling the story in what way, they're going to utilize that influence. They're going to. And so what happens? God's got to get up off his chair again, reach down through the clouds, and make sure it doesn't happen. Make sure everybody keeps it straight again and again and again for what, 1,000 years? Like, come on. And we know that that's not how it happened, right? We know that it's not, because we know, for example, that the story of Jesus saying that he who's without sin cast the first stone, we know that that's added later. We know that that's not an original statement there.
Mm-hmm.
And so if it, what did God, is that when God happened to be taking a nap? And then after God woke up from the nap, he just didn't feel like fixing it? Like, come on. So when he's like, Jesus, I wish you would have said that. That's pretty clever. Let's just leave it in there. Like, come on. So I just want to point out like how sloppy the whole thing is, and how increasingly it doesn't become increasingly plausible. It becomes increasingly implausible. And this guy's laying out a great case for why. I'll let you go ahead and resume it. I just wanted to say that.
Across Judea and beyond, and therefore 70 AD is a convenient date to use to divide the eyewitness period from the following period we will call the amnesic period, even though it's possible that some eyewitnesses would have survived longer than this. The amnesic period, then, is the period beyond living memory of Jesus. Any records that date from this period would have either to have been based on earlier records or oral tradition. I have also placed on this timeline the various received dates of writing of the relevant books of the New Testament. Dates are debated, and the ranges in some cases are quite wide, but the consensus of scholars generally puts Mark as the first gospel written, sometime in the early 70s, followed by Matthew, Luke, and John, and puts Paul's epistles as the earliest Christian writings we have, dated around the 50s AD. The final thing to add to this timeline is the other religions that existed before and during the first century. There were many such religions around the Roman Empire, such as the Egyptian religion, the Roman polytheistic religion with cults to a variety of gods, Judaism itself and its various cults, as well as many others. These religions that existed in the geographical area of the Roman Empire generally did not survive to the present day because they were stamped out during the period of historicist hegemony, but there have been revivals of some of them in the modern era. If we now place the historicist theory on this background and ask first what evidence we would expect in the secular historical record. If Jesus existed as a historical figure and he founded a religion that was anything other than trivial, we would expect to see a record of him in the contemporary historical literature, and furthermore we would expect this record to have been sought out and preserved through the Middle Ages. In non-biblical Christian literature, we'd expect to see a progression from a historical figure to an increasingly mythologized figure as time passes, so that the earliest records we have would detail an earthly life of Jesus, with Jesus displaying maybe wisdom and kindness, and with later additions of a more supernatural nature. We would also expect to see some evidence of a debate in the church. Significant theological changes in a religion usually involve quite a lot of debate, the traces of which often reach us. Dissent from the historicist position of the church would likely have been removed from the record, but we may still find evidence of the church's side of the debate, with statements denouncing those who claim Jesus was simply a man, or statements that specifically justify belief in the divinity of Jesus while assuming that readers accept that he was a real man.
So there you go.
Yeah, forensics. That's really what he's talking about, is forensics. What
Yeah.
we'd expect to find based on the way it works for all religions and all cultures, even back then. Like, that's how it worked for the other religions in the same time period. You know, it's just, yeah, it's forensics. So, you know, someone like Ken Ham says, "Were you there?" And I'm like, "No, but try using that defense in a court of law when forensics has you nailed, buddy." You know, it's the same kind of thing. When there's guesswork involved, but there's a good amount of solid logical reasoning and points to be made, and all of it just builds this cumulative case against the narrative, not for the narrative. Now, keeping all this in mind, here's the thing. I think Carrier, for example, is better at making his case than Ehrman is, but I think there was more or less a guy. I think that there are elements of a real single person's life in the stories that started a religion. I happen to think that. I'm not sure, but that's what I think. So I'm not taking the mythicist position. I have reasons for thinking that and not that that's an important distinction or even a clear distinction. I think that there was a very mentally ill Jewish guy.
I've
I don't
heard
know if
I've heard your hypothesis on this.
Yeah.
I will say in response to that, I think there was a regular guy who may or may not have been a bastard son, like you think. But I see somebody who is enamored with John the Baptist, or somebody like John the Baptist, who was an apocalyptic preacher, started to garner a following, really enjoyed that type of thing, became the heir apparent when the political hit went out on John the Baptist. Kind of become loved and beloved, and then he got politically hit, and the reason, one of the main reasons I think of this is because you have the book of James in the Bible, and this is James the Just is supposedly the brother of Jesus. And at what point do you read that and say, it's really great to hear some of this personalization of Jesus by his own brother, and how lucky his brother thinks he was to have had a half God, half brother, earthly realm brother. And does he talk about any of that? No. He talks about Job, and he talks about Abraham, he talks about Elijah. He does the Jewish apocalyptic trope, just like his brother did. And I think that's why you have Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John do this thing and says, and Jesus said, and Jesus said, and Jesus said, but nobody says, I am so-and-so and I witnessed Jesus say X. It's because these were well rehearsed, just like we were going over with Apology's video where the comedians practice their craft, and then come to their conclusions and bring it out for the world to see. These guys were making something work, and they were doing their thing, and that's and that was the beauty of it. So when you when you get the finishing product, it looks a lot like what James is presenting. It sounds a little bit like the Beatitudes, a little bit like the Sermon on the Plain, a little bit like the Sermon on the Mount. And that's what they know. That's entirely what they know. It's 100%.
Yeah.
So
I agree with you 100%. Everything you just said there, I agree with. I just happen to think that the guy was also mentally ill.
you think it was
So
mentally ill?
this is the reason I think there was a character in the first place, a real guy, because the writers that wrote these stories, they may have been gifted in some ways for writing for the era, but they were not good storytellers. They sucked. The best elements were borrowed elements from other stories that have been well established. But this very real character bleeds through for me. It all seems to fit for me. That of course this radicalized guy is looking to a surrogate father to replace the father that he feels didn't properly embrace him or validate him or love him or whatever, and so that's the typical fundamentalist thing anyways, right? And Wathe, what's his name? John. He was on Myth Vision recently. Capturing Christianity had him on as a
Litwa.
guest last week. No, not Litwa.
No.
Wathey, Wathy, I guess. So he's got this book out that explains, and I talked about it a little bit earlier in my stream, about how it explains the human predisposition for the idea of a God, because we get wired into that way of thinking because we start off as a baby and we have these parents, and the parental figure relates to us in a certain way. Our perception of them develops a certain way, and then later on we feel this sense of emptiness because that relationship hasn't been continued, and also probably because our parents kind of let us down in some ways, like they didn't live up to the hype that we first thought of them with when we were little. And so we're looking for this greater parent to fill that void, what they call the God-shaped hole. And so it's all about neurological wiring and predisposition from infancy, and that's just the pattern that continues on with this idea of a God. That's the need that people are trying to fulfill. And so it's the same kind of thing. So the Jesus character would have done the same thing. He would have felt like he just needs this. There's this emptiness in his life for that role again, and so he's got the super dad who's going to super validate him, right? And all he has to do is like super abuse himself to prove how much he loves his super dad, and that's exactly what happens. He super abuses himself, even to the point where he wrestles with the voices in his head about whether or not he should get himself literally killed kill yourself, but do it through somebody else's hands, right? Effectively the Iron Age equivalent of suicide by cop. And Jesus is like, I don't want to kill myself. I don't want to do this. And it's like, if you love me, you will. If you want to, if you want to be accepted into my castle and validated and accepted and raised up in my home, you will. And Jesus is like, Okay, I'll do it. Like, and in the meantime, like, who hears voices but mentally ill people? Who has that deeply unresolved daddy issues but people that are struggling with a neurotic level of daddy issues? I mean, that's just extreme. It takes everything to an extreme, right? So who hears voices? People that have what do you call that? Schizophrenia, right? And then there's the unresolved daddy issues, and there's the religious radicalization. There's the disparity between the two different value systems, where he's been taught that his father in heaven, who's perfect, is a staunch conservative, like a super fascist authoritarian conservative. And here Jesus has these other values that have developed his own, where he's this progressive kind of leftist communisty kind of guy. And he's all, he's trying, he's trying to harmonize these two worldviews. And ultimately he surrenders and sacrifices not just himself but his own value system in favor of the parent whose love and validation he's seeking. And to me, that just has mental illness all over it. That's just what I'm thinking. So that's just a cursory overview of why I think so. But the writers weren't talented enough, and they didn't understand psychology well enough to build that character from nothing, right? They just weren't. And so, and when I look at the stories that they borrowed from, these other cultural religious stories that they took snips of to build this modern narrative with, um, I don't see a character like that in those stories. Somebody with those deeply unresolved daddy issues and self-sacrificing level of abuse in suicidal ideation and wrestling with voices in their own head about whether or not they should kill themselves. I don't see any of that in those stories. This is why I think that this part's real. That's the legitimate guy. Um, and yeah, he was enamored with John the Baptist, joined his little cult. John gets taken out politically, so he steps into the role and enjoys that for a while until he gets killed. But he intentionally gets himself killed because he's trying to prove how loyal he is to Daddy, and be accepted and validated by the father that wouldn't, in as a surrogate to the one that wouldn't accept him on earth. To me, that just all adds up. So this is why I think there was a real guy, but I don't know. That's where I'm at about it.
Yeah, I think that makes sense, but I don't know about well, I was talking to Nitty last night about statistics. It's like, soon as you add another degree, it makes it sound more believable, but statistically you actually added a decrease that it's true. So adding that he was a paranoid schizophrenic and offed himself by suicide by cop,
Well, here's
seems
the
like
thing.
you've
I mean,
added another layer of
but the
statistic.
but the stories already say that about him. They already say that he's having conversations that nobody else can hear. That he believes
Oh,
that the creator of the universe is his literal dad, and he loses an argument where he doesn't want to have to kill himself, and the voice tucks him into it. It's already in the text. It's already in the story.
that's
Now,
funny.
if we see that stuff happening today with somebody, we immediately recognize the layers of mental illness in play here. We don't even, oh, well, I recognize that as schizophrenia. I recognize that as severe unresolved daddy issues. I recognize this as losing the battle with mental illness, because now the voices want you to get yourself killed on purpose to prove how loyal you are to the voices, right? And so if we see this in a modern context, we recognize it immediately. And I just think that we're used to giving it a pass. We're used to glossing it over in the context of an ancient story. But if anybody knew somebody who really reasoned that way and behaved that way and made those claims, they wouldn't recognize it as mental illness. They wouldn't have those labels for it. But we understand what those things are now. So that's I don't think I'm adding anything to it. I think I'm just interpreting it through a modern psychiatric lens, because we have all these earned understandings that they just didn't have back then.
Well, let me play Jesus and the Spice Girls. This is going to go from mythicism Jesus never. I'm sorry. This is going to go flat out mythicism,
Cool.
and this is about the women at the tomb that are going to anoint Jesus's body with spices.
Gospel, the Gospel of Mark, we read of the anointing of Jesus. Not the
Oh, by the way, I put this at 125.
anointing of him as a king, but the anointing of his body with a fragrant ointment in preparation for his burial. It is 2 days before the Passover, and Jesus is alive and well. He's at the village of Bethany, barely 2 miles from the walled city of Jerusalem. Jesus is staying at the house of Simon the leper, a character we know nothing else about. As Jesus sits at the table, an unnamed woman arrives with an alabaster jar of precious ointment called pure nard. She pours the contents on Jesus' head. Those present, as we shall see shortly, the disciples, object to the waste of a luxury item that could have been sold and the proceeds given to the poor, but Jesus himself defends the woman's action. In his own words, "Let her alone. She has come to anoint my body for its burial." This is famously, and I would say infamously, where Jesus defends his indulgence by saying the poor will always be with you, but he won't be. It's a plea that could be used by any self-indulgent glutton. But in any event, having been anointed in the next chapter of Mark, Jesus dies and is buried by Joseph of Arimathea, another mysterious character, but apparently a member of the Jewish High Council. He wraps the body of Jesus in fine linen, puts the body into a rock-cut tomb, and rolls into place the stone that seals the tomb. Now let's look at how Matthew refines Mark's story. The anointing scene is still in Bethany, the house of Simon the leper. It is again 2 days before the Passover, and again an unknown woman appears and pours ointment from an alabaster jar.
So this is very presented very much like Bart Ehrman suggests you read the Bible if you want to see if there's any kind of deception going on or any kind of narrative that is being exposed here as contradiction.
Yeah.
Where you take each one, and I can't remember what the name of the scholar was that that has an actual Bible that takes, instead of it puts it chronological and parallels it to each individual verse that it's adjacent to, instead of this is the Gospel of Mark and this is the Gospel of Matthew, etc., etc.
Right.
Over Jesus' head. Matthew now clarifies that it's the disciples who are indignant about the waste, and the words from Jesus almost identical to those used in Mark. "Don't trouble this woman, she has poured the ointment for my burial. The poor will always be with you." In the following chapter, Jesus dies, and again Joseph of Arimathea inters the body in what is now his own new sepulchre. But this time, Joseph is identified not as a member of the Jewish High Council, but as a rich man and as a disciple of Jesus. So what does the next novelist, Luke, make of the story? He makes some interesting changes. Luke still has the unknown woman, but now she is called a sinner. She still has her alabaster jar of ointment, and Jesus is still in the house of Simon. But this time it's no longer Simon the leper, but Simon the Pharisee. The venue has been moved from Bethany to somewhere in Galilee, and it's now placed earlier in the year. What Luke does is to develop the actual anointing. The woman first washes Jesus' feet with her tears, if you can imagine such a thing, and then dries his feet with her hair. The ointment is now used to anoint not his head, but his feet. This time round, no one objects to the waste of expensive ointment, and Jesus gives the parable about forgiving sins. Christian apologists will tell you that despite some similarities, this is a different episode entirely. But is it? The fourth gospel proves that the anointing in Luke is merely a variation on the same tale drawn from a common body of material. John's gospel moves the action back to Bethany. John tells us that it's 6 days before Passover. John still has the woman with the ointment, identified as pure nard, as in Mark's original tale. The woman now is identified. She's Mary, sister of Martha, and of the recently raised from the dead Lazarus. But this time round, there's no mention of Simon, either Simon the leper or Simon the Pharisee. As to the actual anointing, John borrows from Luke. The woman anoints Jesus' feet and then uses her hair to dry his feet. What's really interesting is the supposed dialogue presented by John. Now it is not all the disciples that object, but Judas Iscariot alone, who identifies the waste of what amounted to the value of a labourer's annual wages. But John tells us that Judas didn't really care about the poor, but was himself a thief. Though, of course, poor Judas is not able to defend himself. Well, for all the novelties, the words of Jesus are, as we find in Mark and Matthew, "Leave her alone, she has kept the anointment for my day of burial. The poor are always with you." Okay, so there are minor differences, but essentially the common story is that just prior to his death, Jesus was given, either upon his head or his feet, ointment from a woman, and its purpose was to prepare him for his burial. However, we have other changes made in John's version. Joseph of Arimathea now has the assistance of a character found only in John's Gospel, Nicodemus. This guy trumps all the earlier anointings because he brings 100 pounds of weight of myrrh and aloes, which the two of them wrap into the burial linen of Jesus and place the body in a conveniently close garden tomb. Now, could any of this be remotely true? Well, let's step back to the original take in Mark and consider the next supposed episode. In Mark, Mary Magdalene and Mary, mother of Joseph, have watched where Joseph of Arimathea placed the body. They return the day after the Sabbath with a third woman called Salome. Why? Because they are, apparently, bringing sweet spices to anoint the body. Luke repeats the same claim, although he names not Salome, but Joanna, plus other women. But think about it. If the story of Nicodemus were true, why would a body already wrapped in 100 pounds weight of spices that had been anointed anyway with precious ointments need any further anointing? Even if we discount John's tale entirely, we still have a more intractable problem. In the normal universe, a body is prepared for burial and then interred. The tomb is sealed shut and the dead are left in peace. Only in the Christian universe is a body wrapped in fine and clean burial linen, with or without 100 pounds worth of myrrh and aloes, placed in a tomb, the door rolled shut, only to have either 2 or 3 or 4 or more women turn up 2 days later with apparently the intention of anointing the body with even more spices. Such tampering with the dead would be distasteful, sacrilegious, and in the Jewish context unthinkable. In truth, the visit of the women to the tomb is a contrived plot element. The author needs the women to go to the tomb, not really to anoint the body, that's simply a pretext, but to witness that the stone has been moved away, and that the tomb itself was empty. And let me leave you with a final thought. Why did the stone need to be moved anyway? If Jesus really had resurrected, and could, as the Gospels tell us, appear and disappear at will and pass through locked doors, why on earth would he need the stone moved? Only in a fictional drama would Jesus have needed this extra prop. But of course, the story isn't true. It isn't history. It's more astounding rubbish from the New Testament.
Yeah, there you go.
Powerful. Yeah, absolutely.
So to say, to conclude all of this mythicism versus historicity, I guess I need to know a more exact definition of which is which. Because to me, you probably have just an apocalyptic preacher got politically hit, but he probably didn't say nearly anything that's in the Bible. If he said it, it was just because it sounded a lot like all the other apocalyptic preachers in the New Testament era. Like basically the moment you see that 70 AD division line of when Gospels start to get written, they probably still have nearly identical, but there's another generation that's kind of come in and also may have had some of the Pauline influences. I mean, clearly you see a kind of a marriage of a couple of stories, and you see, especially in Acts, you see kind of a schmoozing of Paul, and that's why we hear the vision story 3 times. There's it's almost like when you are trying to say nothing and you word salad your way into saying everything, and I watch Jordan Peterson do this all the time. It sounds like you're saying something when you're really saying nothing.
Yep.
And there's a lot of that in the Bible, in the Gospels. And this is a good example of it, is you have 4 different narratives, and unfortunately, it kind of says everything.
Yeah, it says we're making this shit up. It says.
So, all right. Where are we going? Where are we going, AR? I don't know where he's going. So, where are you at on this? And then we'll wrap this up. We've been on for an hour and a half. Time flies when you're having fun.
Yeah, it does. Logan says Christmas was a plot device. And AR says Jay going live. He might have some more to say about the other stuff. So I hope he does. So, well, I mean, all these were great points. I think that's a wonderful video. I'm going to be checking it out later and talking about it later next week, probably. I love it. Thank you for sharing that with me.
Yeah, my pleasure. So,
and thank you for blessing me with the opportunity to share some live space with you, Tux. It's quite a privilege. Pleasure. I mean, it almost makes me respectable. Almost.
Oh, please.
I'm just saying, it's going in my diary. I'm telling my diary all about it. Dear diary.
Yeah, you're gonna smush a rose right next to me.
Maybe on the next page, but yeah, sure.
On the next page. All right. Well, cheers, James. Let's go to an outro, and we'll see you on the next one.
Peace, Tux. Thanks, man. Talk
to you soon. All right. Bye.